Okay. So it won't go live until. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Biblical Layman. I'm your host, Ricardo Escobar, and I am super excited about this episode. I have with me Pastor Joe Reed. And now, in a second, he's going to introduce himself, tell a little bit about what he does, where he's at, things like that. But I'm very excited because this is not my typical video where I'm going to be teaching on a specific topic or responding to, usually a provisionist, you know, uh, talking about a specific topic or responding to provisionist. But I have here a pastor who is going to share a very tragic season in his life, a season that had a lot of doubts and a lot of ups and downs, but also a season, I think, at least when I read his book, of hope and a season of patience and endurance in our Lord. So I'm very excited, and I was blessed by hearing Pastor Joe's story. This moment, this season, this tragic moment in his life. I was blessed when I read his book, and I know that you, whether you're watching this live or you're watching it after we're done here, you're going to be blessed by Pastor Joe and what he has to say. So I'm super excited. So Pastor Joe, thank you so much for coming to on this channel. Thank you for sharing your story. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. What you do, where are you located, things like that.
All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for having me on. This is really cool. And I guess the first time I've done something like this. So we'll see. You'll
You
have
know,
to hold my hand a little bit and help me along here.
I was listen. I was so thankful that you said yes. Because this is not an easy story to share. And so I was so thankful when I asked you. I was like, I'm going to ask him, but most likely he's going to say no. And you said yes. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your family. What you do, where you're at.
Sure. My name is Joe Reed. I'm pastor at Lewis Lake Covenant Church in the metropolis of Ogilvie, Minnesota. I think the population of Ogilvie is, I don't know, 300 or something, and the church is actually about 10 miles out of Ogilvie. Maybe it's not that far, but quite a ways. Anyway, so I've been here about 7 years. Married to Michelle for 24, going on 25 years. The Lord gave to us 6 children. And we've actually got 2 grandkids now, and so that's kind of fun. Our oldest 3 are married, and then Kylie is still at home, and Violet. So 5 daughters and 1 son, and we're just serving the Lord and plodding through life and the adventures that that it has. And so yeah, I'm pretty boring guy, but I love living here in central Minnesota. Lived in Minnesota almost all my life, and Midwest suits me. And
Yeah. So you're pastor in Minnesota. Okay, you have
Mhm.
what I think the culture would consider a pretty big sized family, right? There was a time
Mhm.
where 5 people, there's some places where 5 children, it's kind of like that's it, like 5,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
But I think in the culture we're on today, 5 children is like what, 5 children. There are times where
Mhm.
like I know my wife has gone to the store with our 4, and my wife is so great that she sometimes she'll take kids from the neighborhood with her, but when she goes into the store with our 4 children, sometimes even more, they give her that eye like, what is
Mhm.
what is wrong with you, kind of,
I
um
know it. I
so
know
you have a big family,
it.
um
Yeah, it's good.
and your bookcase, like I can't believe you didn't talk about your bookcase behind you, but that thing is a beauty. That thing is a beauty.
Uh,
If my wife is watching, that's the kind of bookcase with all those books. All those books are the ones I want. Uh, so super excited. Thank you for
Thanks.
telling us a little bit about you. I want to give, before we get into your beautiful, and I say beautiful because of where you're at today, and what and the overall arching theme of of the season in your life. Before we get to that, I want to give the audience a little background on how you and I met, right? So I I do what I do on Twitter, right? Make posts and debate people and go into comments and go, sometimes we go
Stir
kind of
up trouble.
crazy. Yeah, start trouble, right? Start trouble. And I saw you began to comment under, I think under a, like I would respond to somebody and then you would post under my comment. And a
Mm.
lot of the times you agreed with me. I mean, we're both reformed,
Mhm.
so we're in the same circles. We like the same authors. I think theologically we agree on I would say a good portion of topics. So
I
you
think
kept
so.
you kept commenting, and we kept agreeing, and everything was great. But this one instance, this one instance, there was going around about Jesus' peccability and impeccability. Now, those are big
Mhm.
words, but really all that means is, um, was Jesus able to sin, or was he not
Right.
able? Did he have the potential to sin or not? Right. And
Right.
so that was going around because there was a recent debate where, someone affirmed that Jesus could sin. The other person obviously said no, he couldn't sin. And so when I first heard wind of this, obviously it drove me mad. I went crazy. I went crazy. I was like, how could you say Jesus could sin? That's what are you talking about? And then you came under my comment, and this was the first time that I was like, Joe, what are you doing? We always agree. What are you doing,
We were
buddy?
friends.
Yeah, what are you doing? And you came under my post, my comment, and you said it's actually orthodoxy to believe Jesus could have the potential to sin. And I said, okay. Now, that's when I went, like, because one of the things I don't like to do is I don't like to go back and forth with those in my own camp. Like, I'm not a big fan of
Sure.
that. Um, Obviously, we don't agree. Obviously, just because we're reformed and in the same camp doesn't mean we agree 100% on everything. But
Right.
I did what I always do. I went into the direct message and I sent you a
Mhm.
message. And I was like, what's going on, dude? Like, how could you affirm this? Jesus could not. How could Jesus sin? Right? The
Right.
whole
Right.
plan of redemption, everything. We got into it back and forth, kind of into it. I mean, it was very
Hmm.
friendly, but it was
Hmm.
back and
Sure.
forth. And I think at the end, I think at least we ended in the same conclusion. It was like, okay, I see what you're
Hmm.
saying. You see what I'm saying. And I think we ended in a good note. But I think
Right.
that
Right.
really started our dialogue and our friendship was that topic and that direct message. Right.
Hmm. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and then you made a post about something about an author. Like you said something to the extent of people don't read, such and such author enough, right?
Mm.
And I was trying to be funny. I came under your post and I said, people don't read Joe Reed enough, they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
read Joe Reed. And you said, okay, well, here you go. Here's a book. And I was like, wait, I was shocked. I didn't know you were an author. I didn't know you had a book. And the title threw me off because I was
Mm.
thinking you wrote a book on some theological topic, right? Okay.
Sure.
You made a case for whatever doctrine or topic. And when I read the synopsis, what the book is about, I'm in utter shock. I'm in
Mm.
shock. And if you remember, I went back to Twitter and I was like, how how is she doing?
Mhm.
And your response was amazing. You said she's having a great day today, or it's something to the extent she's having a great day
Yeah.
today. And I got the
Better day
book.
than I'm having.
Right, but right. Then all of it. I would say she's
Mhm.
having a better day than we're all having right now, and
Yeah.
especially the
Yeah.
culture, the way it is.
Mhm.
But I was in shock. I was not expecting this type of book, you know.
Mm.
And I purchased it right away.
Mm.
I purchased it twice actually online. I purchased it twice because
Mm.
actually I don't know what happened, but I did, and I'm glad I did. I can have it on
Mm.
multiple platforms because I use all kinds of things to read books.
Mm.
But I purchased it and I got right into it and I started reading it. And I began to share your story with everybody. Like I
Mm.
told my wife, she was the first person. I met this guy and he wrote a book and it's about this and this and that and that. And we were both just shocked.
Mm.
It was tough. It was tough. And even as I was explaining it to her, like I was getting like my eyes were kind of watering because it was so moving and me as a parent, as a dad, and I have a daughter. It was so moving. So we
Yeah.
began to, I began to tell my wife, I began to tell my parents, I began to tell my friends
Mm.
about this book.
Wow.
And it was so touching that I had to reach out to you and I was like, hey, you need to tell people your story. You need to tell them because this is something that I think a lot of people wrestle with. I know I wrestle with it. I
Sure.
wrestle with it a lot, not knowing, you know, kind of going into that God's sovereignty, right?
Right.
Never knowing if tomorrow we would wake up, or if our one of our loved ones, our parents, will go for a drive, and that'll be the last time, you know. And these are very difficult subjects, and very emotional subjects. And so I started reading your book, and tears were flowing first couple of chapters. And then from there, it just became, just what's happening, what's going on, how is Joe doing, how is his wife doing, what is the church doing, what, so many things that I know we're going to get into. But brother, I was blessed by your story. I was moved by your story. Your resilience, your endurance. And I know that the people who are watching now and who will be watching in the future will also be blessed. And that's why I kept pushing this. Like, you guys got to hear this, man. You got to hear this story. It is powerful. It's heart, wrenching and tear jerking, but it's powerful. So, I've done enough talking. Joe, let's get right into it. Tell us, if you, wherever you want to start in your story, go ahead and tell us. Tell us that story.
Sure, sure. So Alice was our number five, and she was so I don't know how far back I want to go. Um,
How about where your book starts? How about where your
yeah.
book starts?
So um, yeah, in let me take you back to August of 2017, the end of August. A lot of things happened. Um, I I started well. Our sixth child was born on August 25th. That was Violet, our fifth daughter. Violet was born on the 1st of September. I started my first vocational pastoral ministry. I'd always been in some sort of construction related business, and um, so that was happening. And boy, it was really exciting. So it was a major life change, addition of sixth child to the family. And my third Sunday at Lewis Lake, we actually ended up spending in Children's Hospital. Reason was I got home one day, I think it was a Thursday, and Alice met me at the door, like she almost always did. She was just coming up on 4 years old, and she was a daddy's girl. And part of that was Alice came along when I was a little bit older, and I'm all for having kids young, and that's great and wonderful. But when I
Me
was young,
too.
I'm not sure that I understood how significant my children were when I was young. And so as I got a little bit older, I finally was able to grow up a little bit and spend a little more intentional time with them. And boy, that really paid off with Alice, and she was just a daddy's girl through and through. But this particular day, I got to the door and I met her, and her eyes were kind of crossed. And I
Mm.
thought, boy, that's just weird. I'm not sure what's up with that. And I tend not to be a worrier. I always think everything's going to be okay. My wife is the worrier. She worries about everything, so I don't have to. So that's just kind of the dynamic we have. But I said to her, I said, we need to get this checked out and see what's going on. And so we did, just took her to the clinic, and they thought it was, I don't know why they thought maybe it was allergies or something, but anyway, the process, I don't know how well you know the medical system, but the process of going from a general practitioner, just the random doctor at urgent care, to some sort of a specialist is a bit of a journey. But I think about the third or fourth doctor we saw what we saw finally, and made a phone call to Children's Hospital, gave a call down there, and talked to a neurologist, and he said, you guys need to come in. And it was like Friday night, and said, don't wait till Monday, just come in. So we thought, well, that can't be good. So we took her down there, and they ran a bunch of tests, a lot of tests, and it was a university hospital, so it's a lot of interns, it's a lot of students, it's 10 million people coming in and doing the exact same thing, and so
Right.
they got to do it, and it's like follow my finger and touch your nose and all this sort of stuff. Finally gave her an MRI. The next morning, which was Saturday, the other thing about hospitals is on the weekend there's just nothing happening. They're just dead quiet.
Mm,
And
mm.
but we spent the night in the hospital there, and an intern came, or a resident, and he told us that they had found a tumor in her head. They didn't know exactly what it was, but he showed us it. He put so I don't know what I'm looking at, right? He puts this thing up of her brain, a shot from the MRI, and I'm looking for something weird, and I don't know what I'm looking at. So I'm wondering if it's one of these little black spots or something. And he points to this big white ball in the middle and says, "This is her tumor," and it's about golf ball size.
Mm.
And so yeah, oh boy, this is not good. And so that was kind of the beginning of our journey. Um,
Do you by any chance, sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
do you by any chance remember any of the things that went through your mind when you first were told that your daughter has a tumor?
I wasn't surprised, and the
Mm,
reason I wasn't is I couldn't even tell you.
mm,
I guess um, I don't know. And you know what? You know what else is weird about this is when they told us that before they talked about what it was. I was, and this is not me. I was pretty sure it was going to be fatal. Um, and so through this process, of course, we prayed that God would heal her
mm.
a, a lot. But I don't know, from the very beginning, I just thought this is going to take her, and I don't know why. It was just something I felt. I didn't talk much about it,
Mhm.
but yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Otherwise, there's confusion, there's shock,
Yeah, I was gonna ask, was there
all
like
those things.
right. Yeah, shock. I mean, were you like, "What did you just say? Did I hear you correctly?" Was it one of those like, am I hearing you correctly or could you have gotten it wrong, you know?
No, it it more felt like a just kind of a nightmare. You just kind of hope you wake up,
Yeah.
and it's not real.
Yeah.
But we saw, like I saw, her eyes that
Mm,
were crossed, and that's
yeah.
just not right. And so my wife and I were talking, and she's like, "Well, I've noticed that she doesn't walk up the stairs quite as well anymore. She grabs the hand railing a little bit more." And so we just kind of started visiting and comparing notes, and yeah, so yeah, that was kind of the beginning of our journey. And then I think it was that weekend that I sat down and just kind of I did a little bit of blogging at the time, and so I just sat down and began to write about our story, what was happening, for a couple of reasons. One, I just wanted to let everybody know what was happening. Um,
Mhm.
and I also felt that that was my job to do that. So like, I'm not on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, but there's like almost nobody I know in the real world on Twitter, and I'm kind of okay with that.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
um, yeah, so I'm not on a lot of social media, but how else do you communicate anymore in a
Mhm.
mass communication form? So I wrote a blog article and just kind of explained where we were, and then that was something that I continued to do throughout the process, and
Did
those
these
became the book.
did these blog articles make it into the book?
Yes,
They
yeah.
did.
So the
Okay.
book the book is really the blog articles. I touched them up a little bit, just
Mhm.
kind of try to brush
Sure.
up the grammar and stuff and do a little editing. But yeah. So the book is the collection of blog articles, which it was my way of communicating to
Yeah.
people what was happening. It was my way of thinking through the thing out loud,
Yeah.
processing on paper, which was
Was
good. And it was also my way of, in some ways, kind of pastoring my people. And I thought, well, let's see if my theology works in the real world, and we'll just put it out there, and say this is what I believe, and this is what's happening, and now how do those things work together? So what they told us was that she had DIPG. It's a childhood cancer, and it's fatal in like 100% of cases.
yeah.
It's a brainstem tumor, can't operate on it. They can radiate it. It goes away for a couple months and then it comes back with a vengeance. So the average time from diagnosis to death is 9 months. And I think for Alice, she lived about 8.5 months. So it's kind of a textbook case
Mm.
of that. So Yeah, that was whew, we
Yeah,
yeah
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Was it therapeutic to, as you were writing? Was it? I understand you're writing for an audience, right? To let people
yeah.
know. And was it therapeutic for you to get your thoughts down, things in your heart that I'm sure were heavy
Yeah.
during this season? Was it at all therapeutic, or was it more for the people to know what's going on?
No, it was good for me too. Yeah,
Mm.
it was for sure good for me. Just even process things out loud. To hear my own heart
Yeah,
speak. In actual words.
yeah.
You can feel a lot of things, and emotions can run really high. But when you try to put words to them, that's a different dimension, I think.
When I
So
read your
yeah,
book, I it was like I could feel your emotions. It's like I could
mm,
feel Joe. It was like you put me in your place, and it was my
oh,
daughter that had the tumor,
mm,
and I had just been given the news 9 months and all of that, right? You put me in such a place where it's like, oh my goodness, you were, because it didn't feel like you held anything back. It didn't feel like,
yeah,
okay, I'm going through this situation, but I have to be a pastor and I have to keep it, keep my face, and I'm trusting in God, and I have to be theological, right? It didn't feel like that. It really felt like a broken father, like just
yeah,
humanity, right? Like a human being. Like, I'm a pastor. I believe in the sovereignty of God. Um,
yeah,
but this is how I feel. This is my heart.
yeah,
I just got this bad news about my daughter. It's 100% right. Like, no one has ever. One of the things you mentioned in your book was that no one has ever beaten this cancer, right? It had a hundred
mhm,
percent rate, and it
yeah,
was 9 months. And so it was like everything was against you. It was like, all the facts and
yeah,
everything was against you, and you were just pouring your heart out in this book. I mean, you weren't holding
mm,
anything back.
yeah,
And in the book, I could see there were times where you were trying to, I felt like you were doing some of the things that the psalmists do. The Psalms, the authors would speak like in a very dark way. It's like,
mhm,
where are you, Lord? Have you forsaken
yeah,
me? Why am I
mm,
walking through this valley of darkness, and you're not here? But then they would, like, towards the end, it'll kind of take a turn for a positive, but you're still
mhm,
good. But I will
yeah,
always remember what you've done for me. And that's what this book felt. It felt a lot of, I'm struggling. I don't know what
yeah,
to do. I feel helpless. I can't help my daughter. I can't help the doctor. I can't. And yet, Lord, I'm trusting. I'm trusting in you. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So that
yeah.
that came right through the book. Definitely, no
Cool,
doubt.
cool.
So okay, you
Yeah.
got the news. Your daughter has a tumor. It's cancerous. What happens to your family after this news? Talk about how, that journey, that going back and forth to the hospital, the visits, and all of that stuff. Tell us a little bit about that journey, that part of this season.
Yeah. Boy, Alice had four older siblings, and our oldest, Natalie, was I think 16 at the time, and she's very emotional, kind of wears her emotions on her sleeve. And I remember telling the kids, we were in the chapel of the hospital when they finally got down to see us, and I just met with them and told them what was happening. And she just shrieked, "No, no, it can't be!" And the other ones were more subdued, and so they processed that differently. Um, so that made interesting dynamics. Parenting kids, a whole family through something like this when all the attention is on the one sibling. But they did so well. Um, and I'm proud of them. They processed it all in different ways. One of the things that we started to do together. So my wife taught our kids the 23rd Psalm when they were just little, and Alice had just learned it actually,
Mhm.
and I actually have an audio recording of her saying the 23rd Psalm, and it's precious. I just love it. But we started saying that together as a family, and we did that a lot. Um, we I wouldn't say daily, but at a lot of junctions when we were together, we were together a lot. We would just say that together, and that the more we said it, actually, the more meaningful and helpful it became, and that just
Mm.
kind of became the soundtrack, the background music of Alice's life really was the 23rd Psalm through that process. One of the beautiful things about coming to Lewis Lake was I came in as the associate pastor, and there wasn't an associate before me, so I wasn't filling anybody's shoes. And so Pastor Bob, who was the senior pastor at the time, and and the church just said, take care of your family. So, in the providence of God, we had a new baby. I had a new position, which meant I was able to leave all my construction work behind that was done. And so when the sickness came on with Alice, I spent so much time at home, so much time with my family. I didn't have to go to work. I was preaching like once a month and doing a little class or something here and there, but I was really freed up to just spend time with my family. And I guess in some ways that was my ministry, not just to my family, but you're living publicly as a pastor. People are curious about your life and kind of curious how's this going to work out. How
Mhm.
does our pastor handle something like this? So,
Yeah.
but you mentioned talking like the Psalms and stuff. There's that great verse in Job, which we look at and say Job was such a great man of faith because he says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." But the very next line, Job says, "Yet I will argue my ways to his face." Um, so this is how you feel. You're like, I trust God, but this doesn't make any sense. And why is he doing this to me? And yeah, there are times when you feel like you're kind of unfairly targeted.
Yeah.
Not many kids have this sort of a cancer, and here I've got it. And I do believe in a sovereign God.
Right.
They're really well-meaning people who tried to take the burden off of God and say, well, this is just life in a fallen world. And some would even say some things like God didn't want this to happen. But who wants a God like that? you know
Well,
I
I don't think we would even reject that this is a fallen world and things like this happen in this world.
no,
Not at all.
no,
Definitely, these
no.
things happen in this world. I mean, and that's something too that was at play here in this season with your daughter Alice was okay. We hit the books and we get into all these theological discussions. But what
Mhm.
happens when you come face to face with something like this? Death
Right,
itself, I would say,
right.
right? 9
Mhm.
months to live, right?
Yeah,
You come to face with death itself. How does your theology hold up? And
yeah,
this is something that we
yeah.
talked about, you and I talked about over the phone was when a situation like this happens in someone's life, right? There are three things, there are three paths that are open to a person. At least I think so, right? The first one is they end up leaving the faith, right? Because,
Mhm.
God is good. And what's happening to me, to my family, to my daughter is not good.
Yeah,
This can't be right. If there's no healing, right? If there's no peace, if there's, fill in the blank, then how can God be good? Or maybe there is no God, right? Maybe he's left us. And so people end up, tragedy like this, people end up leaving the faith, right? Then you
mhm.
got the second person that, well, they still hold on to God, but they begin to create a God in their own image, right?
Mhm.
Maybe God,
Yeah,
maybe God can't heal this particular infirmity. Maybe he's not powerful enough to heal. And I've actually heard this. I've actually heard testimonies of people who will look at calamity like a tornado, right, or a hurricane, who's killed thousands of people and homes, and they'll look at that and go, "Well, God is good. He could have stopped that. He did not.
mhm.
Maybe he's not as powerful as I thought." And little
Mm.
by little, his omniscience, his omnipresence, or his all powerfulness, they begin to strip those things from God, and now they have a God made in their own image. And then there's
Sure.
people like yourself who go through facing death in the face and still come out strong in the Lord and continuing to walk in faith, even though I know you and I have talked. There's still after effects, right? It's not like
Yeah,
it's a season and then it's over and we're moving on. I mean, this is
right.
always going to be a part of your life. It's going to mark your life and your family. And so, I thank the Lord that the Lord kept you in this path when you could have easily gone, many different ways, and your theology was really applied here. This was theology applied, right? This wasn't
Yeah.
all, mental, intellectual, but it was applied. You really had
Right.
to take your view of God's sovereignty, right? That
Hmm.
nothing in this world comes to pass in
Yep.
some way without God, right?
Right.
Whether we
Hmm.
talk about permissive will, decree will, we get we start to make distinctions, whether we get into that. But you know, as Reform, I believe you don't hold to Westminster Confessions, right? You hold to the 6089 Baptist,
Yeah,
or
that's the improved version of the Westminster. Yeah, yeah. the corrected,
right.
the corrected
But
version.
but in that confession, right, it says, um similar to the Westminster, right? All things come to pass by God, right?
Yep.
My goodness, it's slipping my mind. I recite it all the time, but nothing comes to
Yeah.
pass without God's kind of decreeing it approval through
Right.
secondary means, necessarily, freely, contingently, right? So
Mhm.
talk about that. Talk about how was your theology challenged during this difficult time with your daughter, the cancer, knowing that death was down the road, right? I mean, I know you had hope that
Yeah.
the Lord would bring a different outcome, right? But you
Sure.
still had that in the back of your mind, did you not? That yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, the cold reality is that kids die, um, and that's it happens, and it happens to Christians and it happens to non-Christians. I think John Owen had 11 kids, and 10 of them died in childhood, and the 11th, I think, went through a divorce, if I remember right, which in the 1600s is things are pretty bad for her, and I think then
Right.
she died too. So here's Owen buries a whole pile of kids, and so we're certainly not alone. Um, so you're wrestling with a God who allows kids to die. However you think about the sovereignty of God and God's relationship to evil, you always have to say God could have done something to stop a thing, and if he didn't, why didn't he? And of course,
Right.
the why is the big question.
Well, the other
Um,
option is to just strip him of his all powerfulness, which people have done.
sure,
But if you're
yeah,
not going to do that, yeah, you have to ask
yeah.
yourself.
You're not a Christian anymore at that
Yeah,
point, you know.
I agree with you on that. I agree with you. But yeah, but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you gotta come to terms with the God who allows this sort of thing to happen. And the question we always want to ask is why. And I think we want to know the answer to that question, because somehow we think, okay, well, if I know why, then I'll know what God is doing, and then I can say it's going to be okay. We'll feel better about it. We're like, okay, well, this good thing is coming out of it. And people talk like that all the time. They say, well, a good thing will come out of it, and so you try to look for the good stuff that comes out of a situation to outweigh the badness of the situation. But when it comes to losing a child, for instance, people would come up to me and say, "Yeah, you know what? I'm so much closer to God now, and I'm so thankful for your story." And I said, "Well, honestly, I'd rather have my daughter back than you be closer to God. No offense, you know."
Right.
Uh,
Right. Sure.
so those sorts of things were never that persuasive to me. Really, what it came down to for me was either I can trust God that He is working all things together for my good, and for my daughter's good and for my family's good, or I can't.
Mm.
Either He's a God who knows what's going on, or He doesn't. And so, you know, I used to, as I wrestled through this, I would get in the pulpit and say, if I as a dad had the ability to heal my daughter at any time and didn't, you'd think I was a bad dad.
Right.
But
Right.
we serve a God who can heal anyone at any time and doesn't. And we can't say he's not a good God. We
Right.
can't say he's not a good father. He is. Um, and, and at
Boy.
some point, you just have to trust him. So I'm sitting in Children's Hospital this first weekend, and I went to Job, because where else do you go, to look for
Right.
comfort when you're told you're going to lose a child. Um, basically. And so I went to the end of Job. I wanted to hear from God, right? And so that's where God shows up and starts questioning Job. Job, where were you when I sunk the foundations of the earth and all
Right.
this? And that goes on. Did you know this goes on for 4 chapters?
Yeah.
God,
Towards the all the way
God
to
does
the
that.
end. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So,
end.
so I'm reading this, and in real time, this is what's happening. I read 38. I read 39. I'm like, okay, God is sovereign. I get it. Um, and then you get to 40 and 41, and God keeps going. And I
Right.
mean, he does. And I figured out why. Because by the time I got to the end of 42, I said, okay, God, you know what you're doing. I don't. So it's like the first 2 chapters, I was like, okay, God, you can do whatever you want. You're God. I'm not. Fine. But by the time you get to the end of that, really, I walked away from there. I'm sitting in the windowsill at Children's Hospital, and God, you know what you're doing. And not only do you have the right to do this, you know what you're doing, and I can trust you. And that was hugely comforting. That was a
Mhm.
big deal. Now, it didn't mean I didn't struggle, because of course I struggled, and lots of struggles. How do you live life with, you know, a daughter who's going to die? How do you try to wrestle through all the hopes? How do you know, um, we live in a world where people think that every problem has a solution, especially health problem. So, here's another reason I wrote the blog, is so that my wife didn't have to handle all these people calling and giving her all these miracle cures for cancer, right? Because once, if you say you've got cancer, your really well-meaning people will offer all kinds of hope. Oh, you got
Right.
to eat this, you got to go see this doctor, you got to do this, that, and the other thing, and it's just like all hands on deck trying to beat the thing.
Right.
um, but the Lord gave, by his kindness, he gave both Michelle and I a real peace that he was in control, that this was going to be okay. I mean, it wasn't going to be the outcome we wanted, but we were both in some sense resigned to it,
Hmm.
and trusted the Lord through it. And that was, we wouldn't have made it probably if we hadn't been on the same page there. So really, we did medically what was advised, but we didn't try to eke out every possible hour
Right.
of every possible day. We wanted to spend as much time with Alice as we could, and be together as a family and enjoy those days, and we did. They were still hard, especially when you get to the end and watch her fail, as you read. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
We're gonna get there. But so okay. So you got the news. Now you're going to chemo, right? That's what you guys end up doing. That's what's advised.
radiation. Yep, yep,
Radiation. Yeah. Radiation.
yep,
So you
yep.
guys for months go back and forth, right? To the hospital, home.
Yeah, I
Back
think
and
it's
forth.
about 6 weeks, and we live an hour from the hospital. Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
yeah,
that's right. It was 6 weeks in chemo, but it was months of like lots of hospital visits, lots of spending time together, like you said, taking off, the church, which I want to get into the church part, right? Because that's to me, that's a big part of your story. As you're
yeah,
going through this, a lot of people showed up.
yeah,
To me, when I read it, I was like, this is what the church is supposed to be right here. This was
yeah,
not just this was action. The church was in action. It was moving. It was moving. They saw
yeah,
somebody, their pastor, just got horrible news, going through the valley of the shadow of death, literally,
yeah,
literally.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
they said, we need to come alongside him and move with him. So could you talk
Yep.
a little bit about how the church played to me, an essential role in whatever you want to talk about, whether it's financially or with food or with just support, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mentioned that one of the big things is they didn't begrudge me any time with my family. They didn't expect me to be into the office, or there was none of that. They were gracious about that. They're very kind. They put on a big benefit. I don't know if that's a Midwestern thing where you do a benefit, and do spaghetti and silent auction, and they arranged all that. And people were very kind financially. They were super generous. We didn't have any financial worries the whole time, which
Amazing.
meant, yeah, it was really
Amazing.
nice. It was like we just didn't have to worry about those things. We don't live lavishly, but we could just kind of do what we felt like we needed to do. and what was best for Alice and for us as a family. Because yeah, I mean, we're a pretty tight knit family, and so we're all in this together. And
And you have a
so the
you have a
church was really supportive. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and you have a big family to feed. You're not it's not
Hmm.
just four of you. There were like six or
Yeah,
seven at that time, right? It was like seven of you.
yeah, yeah. So six kids plus Michelle and I.
Two,
So yeah, there's
eight.
eight of us gather around the dinner table, and yep, squeeze into our 7-passenger minivan. Um,
That's right.
so I was planning to get a 8-passenger vehicle, never did, and
Yeah.
but that's okay. We just squished in, and it was fun. It was fine. So.
Yeah, I thought it was an amazing as I was reading the book, I was applauding the people. I was like, yes,
Mhm.
this is the church right here in action, right?
Yeah, yeah,
We so often, we meet on Sundays. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. But this felt like it was bonding. It was like I you're not just a pastor, you're not just a member. Your life is my life is your life. If your
yeah,
daughter is going through, radiation, if you're in trouble, whether it be financially, whether it be, you need finances, you need food, whatever it is, you need support, we're here
yeah,
for you. And I think the church really showed up. It really shined in this
yeah.
dark time. Your
Big time.
family too, your family, your parents and your brothers. You talk about
Yeah.
them a little bit and their role in all of this, right? They took
Hmm.
they took care of some of your family members and they built some things. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. They were available to do anything. They're self-employed, and so it
Okay.
gave them a little bit of flexibility. But yeah, they were just there. Um, Eventually, they would come over to my house, and we'd build Alice's. I call it her final bed, her casket. Um, so that was a hard night, but a really special night when it came time to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it you and your two brothers that did that?
Yeah, yep, yeah. We did it one Friday night. When I knew that the end was kind of coming. Um,
Yeah.
I, I I don't know. I was at a funeral because I go to funerals because I'm a pastor, and I was up by a coffin, and it was just really cheap. And I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm gonna make one, and
Yeah.
it's going to be fitting. And so I invited them to come and do it. I just wanted to do it overnight for whatever reason. I didn't want to do it in the daytime when the kids were awake. I just wanted to. I don't know. I don't know why I felt the need to kind of build that thing in the under the cover of night, but we did, my brothers and I, and that was really special. I'm really glad that I could do that for her and that they were there and a part of that. It was just kind of a way to honor, my daughter, to give her a good bed.
I cannot imagine being a father having to make my daughter's coffin, you know,
Yeah,
and
it sucks, but it's even worse than not doing it for me. So
that's true. I mean, if you felt it in your heart to do it, but I can't
yeah.
imagine. Was that the part of the story where you three were weeping, or was that before? Because there was a part where you three hugged, I think, and was that when the news, or was that when the coffin?
I don't
You don't
know.
remember?
I would
Okay,
have to remember.
okay,
Yeah, I'm not
okay. But I
sure.
I do remember reading that you three weeped a lot
Yeah,
together, and
yeah,
my goodness, I my goodness, it's tough. So you guys are going
yeah,
through
yeah.
radiation. The church is really showing up for you guys, supporting. So you guys get to the end of radiation, right? And what
Mm-hmm.
happens to the tumor at the end of radiation?
Well, at the end of radiation, it was gone. They radiated it away, and so true to form, we had Alice back for about 4 months. She was normal. So that was kind of a weird period. It's like, okay, what do we do now? Because there was essentially, so we diagnosed this thing in the end of September. I think it was around Thanksgiving is when radiation was over. So
Mhm.
so from the end of November through April, there's basically no medical stuff. We weren't at the hospital other than an occasional checkup. It was it was just kind of normal life, but it's not really normal. You know, I,
Yeah. Did
it's
it?
you're just kind of sitting on pins and needles waiting for the other shoe to drop, and trying not to think about that. But how do
Right.
you not? Trying to enjoy, how do you enjoy a day when you got a lot of pressure to enjoy it? It's like, okay, we don't have too many more days with Alice probably, so let's try to make the most of this one. That pressure gets really old, actually.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, if someone told me I had 30 days, 60 days, 9 months to live, I would do this and that. I would, do these things that I plan to do, right? What was your approach, right? When you came after radiation, you had a couple months with her. Were you guys like, okay, we're going to do everything that we've always wanted to do with her. We're going to give her the best life. Or were you guys more of a, you know what? We're just gonna stay home and we're just really gonna enjoy each other's company, really
Mhm.
build those memorable moments. Not that you can't build memorable moments going on vacations, but I think
Right,
they're
right.
they're different. What approach did you
Yeah.
guys take during this couple of months before that time came, that day came?
Um, Really, uh, we wanted to make life good for Alice. And Alice was a homebody. Now we took our trip with Make a Wish. They sent us down to Florida, and that was fun. But I think I wrote in the book that Alice's favorite part of that trip was coming home,
Yes, you
and
did. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
she
She did
just she
really. Yeah,
she's a homebody. She just loved being home. She loved being with her family, um, and so that's what we did a lot of. Um, yeah, yeah, it was just a lot of being together, being at home, doing the things that she enjoyed, which meant watching a lot of SpongeBob, and she fell in love with Three Stooges.
yeah.
Uh,
You wrote a
you know,
lot about that. Yeah, the Three
yeah,
Stooges.
yeah, that was just, I
Yeah,
don't know. It just meant a lot to her, and so it meant a lot to us just to do that with her. And so yeah, we just tried to enjoy life with her. She loved to play Minecraft, and so she played Minecraft with her siblings. And yeah, that's what it was. It was just being at home mostly, and
yeah,
doing the things that she enjoyed doing. So it's very simple. Um, we just didn't feel, I guess, pressure to do anything spectacular,
yeah.
or out of the ordinary, because she was four, and
Right. Yeah,
she loved playing dolls. She loved playing with her sisters, and being home, and so that's good. That was good
yeah.
with us. Yeah,
Was she
yeah.
your youngest at the time?
No, Violet was 1 month old when
Okay.
Alex was diagnosed, and so she
Okay.
was 10 months old, and yeah, Violet was she's my girl now, and she's very very special. But she cried a lot and she threw up a lot. And she was kind of a pain. All
Yeah.
the videos that we have of Alice have Violet crying in the background. So that was the other background noise of our life, was a screaming baby. But
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like
It, it, you know, in your book, kind of. So okay, before we get to this part, I really want to get to, but so you have these months where life is it's normal again, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then at some point, it comes back, right?
Yep. Yep.
The cancer comes back, and you're made aware by the doctors. And then you talk about how not only did it come back, but it kind of came back with a vengeance, which is something that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, I think, earlier in your book, that when it does come back, it comes back stronger.
Yeah.
And one of the things you talked about that I think was probably the toughest was you were watching your daughter in real time kind of start to
Mm-hmm.
fail, right? Her body, her movements begin to fail. And then on top of that, you had Violet.
Mm-hmm.
What was that dynamic like for your wife, for you? Was it hard because, Violet being a month old or a couple months old at that time, can't really
Mm-hmm.
do doesn't really do much much, right? She's got to
Right.
be
Right.
held,
Right.
she's got to be held, she's got to be fed, you got to change her diaper. But now you have
Mm-hmm.
Alice, who's also kind of, slowly body begins to not work. How
Yep.
did you guys deal with that? I mean, the partnership must have been 100% tight between you and your wife or something, because how did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, that was certainly a big part of it, and our older kids were just great. They spent a lot of time with Alice, and really did everything they could. It was all hands on deck. I think, when we look back at some of those days, there probably we'll think of those as the best days of our lives, because we were just together. We were family. We were just relaxed and enjoying life. I mean, as relaxed as you can be in a situation
Yeah.
like that. Um, but we had no goals in life other than just to be together and enjoy the day, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Everything was centered around her, it felt, right? Everything was it
sure,
was Alice, and, helping
yeah.
her, being united as a family. Um, yeah, I mean, it was like I said, when I was reading your book, I mean, I was tearing, I was weeping,
Mm,
because I can imagine me as a father, like, going through that tough
yeah.
time. Um, but okay, so you guys are going through this normal time. It comes back with a vengeance. And then could you just talk, if you're willing to, just kind of talk about the last 2 weeks or so? If you remember some of the things that you guys experience, anything you want to tell towards the end of this chapter of this season of your life.
Yeah, those were those are hard days. You know they're coming, and you want it to go as easy as possible. You know, um, at, at some point you stop praying, Lord, please heal her, and you switch over and pray, Lord, just take her gently.
Mm,
Um,
wow.
and but there were times when it didn't feel like that was happening, and that was really frustrating. Um,
Mm. Frustrated with God or frustrated with
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So probably probably the most brutal time for me was about 3 days before she died.
Mm,
Um, she went through for about 2 days. She went through this period where she was gargly in her breath, and she was gasping for breath. She was like,
oh, that's right. That's right.
and she did that. It was the weirdest thing, Ricardo. She woke up and she would do that until it was time to go to sleep, and then we just had her in our bed, which we never have kids in our bed, but we had Alice in our bed. And so Alice was laying on one side of the bed, and my wife was next to her, and I was next to my wife. And I put my arms around Michelle, and Michelle put her arms around Alice, and she slept like a baby till the morning. And then she woke up in the morning and started doing that all over again. And after about 6 hours of that one day, I just said, watching my daughter gasp for breath, I was just like, Lord, if you're going to heal her, and we asked you to do that, and I'm okay with you taking her. Just take her. Don't make her go through this. And it was just brutal. I just hated it. I was just like, it was. That's when I felt like God wasn't being nice, when He was really being cruel. It's like, yeah. I guess what I thought was, I thought, you know what, Lord, I have tried to be a real good trooper in this. I have trusted you. I've trusted your sovereignty. I've tried to glorify you. I guess I felt like God owed me one. God owed me to show up and make that
Right.
death process really easy. And I really expected this, because you hear about this from all the super saints. They say, you know what, things were really bad and I should have been in a lot of misery, but God showed up and gave me this great peace. Well, I didn't get that. I didn't get that at
Mm,
all. I was kind of ticked off about the whole thing. I was just like, Lord, just take her, you know. The last 24 hours, she can't eat, she can't drink, she can't even close her eyes. Um, it's rough. And here, one of the things that I have to do is I have to give her morphine, and the meds that kind of help keep her calm. That's a dreadful thing to have to do, to kind of drug your daughter in the last 2 days of her life. And I think that was the right thing to do, but those are hard things to handle. So for me, um, I guess I was expecting a smoother, calmer, more peaceful, quicker, kind of a death. And so really that was the time when I was probably the most angry with
mm,
God.
mm.
Was on her deathbed, and that passed. It wasn't there wasn't like an aha moment. It was just, I don't know, a couple
Yeah.
days later, it's like, it's over.
Right.
Whatever it was, it's over, and she's not feeling that anymore. And she made it through, and we made it through, and you know, God is still with us, and gave us grace through it. But yeah, I came to realize along the way that sometimes we think God made promises to us that He didn't make, and
Mm,
so some people think that God promises healing and all that, and I never believed that. But somehow I thought that God would had somewhere promised to show up in really bad moments and make it so that they didn't feel that bad. And so people say, oh, this was a terrible thing that you had to go through. And I would say, well, no, God showed up and I was at peace and it just didn't seem so bad. Well, that didn't work out that way for me. I felt like God didn't show up and I felt like it really was that bad. And I was kind of upset about the whole thing. But by God's
Yeah.
grace, that passed, and He graciously forgave me. Jesus died for those sins. So
Right. Right. I can't tell you how many Psalms I've read where, again, it starts off very kind of dark, right? You've forsaken me. And then you hope that it's going to end on like a good note. But he came and he rescued me and he saved me and he delivered me. And it actually doesn't. It actually just ends with, though this is hard and difficult, I feel forsaken, you're still good. And I will always contemplate your good works. And I will remember where I came from, how you delivered me in the past. And then that's it. Like it never
yeah,
like tells you, he ended up delivering me. He ended up, I can't tell you how many Psalms end on a bad note, end up
yeah,
just, when will you come, Lord? When will you come? We're waiting.
yeah,
Our enemies have, they're over us. They've taken over us. They've conquered us. Where are you? And that's it. You know,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
Psalms are such a rich place for times like these. Like I have
yeah.
probably have been blessed by the Psalms more than any other book. Because you have ups and downs, you have joy, you have peace, but you also have darkness and
Yep.
forsaken. I mean, when Jesus was on the cross, he quoted from Psalms. I believe it's Psalms
Mm-hmm.
22.
Yep.
Lord, why have you
Mm-hmm.
forsaken me? Right.
Yep. Yep.
And so he quotes from the Psalms. And
Right.
so the Psalms to me has been a place of refuge and hope. And I think it was for you too. I mean, Psalms 23,
Yeah.
you guys recited that a lot. Psalm
Mm-hmm.
23. I think you talked
Yep.
about a couple other Psalms too, but um
Yeah, Psalm 44 was a big one for me. Psalm 44 starts, Lord, we heard what you did, for our forefathers, and you opened up the sea, and you did all this wonderful stuff for them, and so we're expecting great things from you, God. And then it just says, but you didn't go out with our armies; you led us as sheep to the slaughter. And then David says, all this has happened, but we were still faithful to you. We didn't go serve other gods. Um, and so I think of that look by Mel Gibson in Braveheart when he's in the battle and he fights the guy and it turns out it's Robert the Bruce, right? He's been betrayed, and that look that's on Mel Gibson's face is the look that David has when he realizes that God is fighting against him. It's like, God, you have led us as sheep to the slaughter, and all this terrible stuff is happening, and God, you're bringing that on. And Psalm 44 ends, rise up, O Lord, redeem us for the sake of your steadfast love. And it just ends there, in that
yeah,
in that note of hope, but maybe a little bit tentative. And so
yeah,
so that was, yeah, that was a profoundly helpful psalm for me, encouraging, just because it matched the reality of what I was going through. It's not like it made me feel
uh,
better,
sure,
but it said, okay, what I'm experiencing is matches reality, and
right,
God does allow his people to go through these sorts of things from time to
right,
time.
right.
Yeah.
What's funny, you touch on something. One of the biggest lessons I learned from the Bible was from a small book. Um, not not Malachi. That's the last book of the Old Testament, but it's another one with an M, I think. Um, my goodness, it's slipping my mind, but it stuck the first time I read it. It stuck on me, but it's one of these smaller ones that no one really likes to read, right? And the guy, and so it starts off with like, Lord, our enemies are winning. Like these people are more wicked than we are, and they're
Yeah.
prospering. They're prospering. They're winning, and like, where are you? What's going on? Why have you left your people? And then literally that
Habakkuk. Yeah.
that's the one. That's the one. Habakkuk. Yes, I said M. Habakkuk. And then the next chapter, the Lord says, "Yeah, that's me. I'm bringing those wicked people to you."
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Whoa,
I'll deal with
okay."
them.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I'm the one in charge. I'm bringing them to
Yeah.
you, to conquer
Yes.
you because of judgment, right?
Yes.
And so that to
Yep.
me was that messed up my theology for some time. Like, what do you do with that?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but
Yep.
the great thing about Romans 8, right? Romans 8:28, right?
Yeah.
All things
Yep.
work for good, for our good, right? All things work
Yeah.
according. Of his will, for those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. Might have messed it up a little bit, but you get
Yeah,
what I'm
no,
saying.
you're right. And they tell us in pastoral training, don't quote that verse to people who are suffering because it seems so glib and stuff. I don't know. I found
Which
no
one?
verse more. All things work together for
Oh,
good.
for good for those who are called. Yeah,
And I think that was so comforting to me. It's like all things, and that has to include the bad things, work together for good. Like, how could you not be happy about that? How does
right.
that not give profound comfort
Yeah, I
in the
can't.
midst of trials?
I can't tell you how many times the biblical authors will say, through this experience, I was made stronger, right? Paul says in Romans
Sure.
5, we were talking about it, right? That suffering produces endurance, which produces
Yeah.
patience, and then eventually to hope, right?
Yeah.
And I feel
Yeah.
like that's what was happening to you. In fact, I want to read it quick because as I was reading your story, I want to read that because that's what I felt was happening in your story. Because eventually,
Hmm.
even though the story is very tragic, right? This season did not end in the outcome that you wanted. Is very tragic. I think it ended with hope, right? And so in Romans 5, Paul says, uh, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. I mean, through suffering, all these fruits, all these things happen, and I mean, it's just amazing. And as I was going reading the story, watching your progression from the father who got the news to the father who's going back and forth between the visits, to the father going through chemo, not chemo, radiation, and now the father who's back to a normal life, a daughter who's clear of this tumor, and then back to a daughter who has the tumor again. And as I saw it, it's like you were suffering, you were persevering, you were enduring. It was hard, but I think it ended on a positive note. So tell us about that last day as we kind of start to wrap up. Tell us about that last day and moment here.
Oh man. Well, um, let's see. It was about 9 o'clock, I guess, at night, um, and we kind of knew it was coming. My wife went. My wife's a very accomplished pianist. She plays beautifully, and
You
so
mentioned
she
that
had
in the
been.
book. Yeah, she
Yeah,
played a lot of piano.
yeah, yeah, and everybody here at the church just knows that and loves her. And so, anyway, she'd been sitting with Alice pretty much all day, and she went to play the piano, and so I sat with her, and yeah, I noticed her breathing changing some, and so I called Michelle in and the kids, and I don't know, I put Alice in Michelle's arms, and I laid my head on her chest and just listened to her heart, which was just pounding. That particular cancer, because it's in the brain stem, it affects your respiratory and your heartbeat. And so
Okay.
her heart for 3 days was just pounding, just so fast. I don't know what her pulse was, but it was crazy fast. Um, but yeah, I listened to her final heartbeats. I just listened to her heart slow down and then quit. It didn't beat anymore. And so we were there, all of us, the kids were there with us in the room, and we said Psalm 23 and called called family, called our pastor, called the undertaker, and because I knew him from doing funerals and such, and yeah, we.
How did your
I said
kids,
to my dad, "The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So
Job, right? Job.
yeah,
How did your kids react to that moment?
you know, pretty well, pretty well. It wasn't a surprise. It was something we were waiting for. You feel lots of things, sadness, but in that moment, it's a lot of relief. It's like, okay, it's over. We've been on pins and needles waiting for this moment.
She's
The
not
fact
suffering anymore.
she's not suffering, and yeah, yeah. So we're sad, but I found out something in this process. There's only so much sadness that you can have. At least I could. I can cry for about 2 days straight, and then I'm done. I go numb, can't feel anything anymore, just run out of emotions. And so we were pretty out of emotion at that point. And um,
Yeah.
you get into kind of the mode of you're doing a job. I think what I say in the book is we can't we can't save the plane, but we're going to try to crash it as gently as we can. And so, that was our job as a family and as parents. That's what we were trying to do, is just help get Alice there as well as we could. And I
Yeah.
think we did.
Yeah.
I think we did. So,
One thing you don't talk much about the book, because it is centered on Alice and her life and the journey, is did you didn't talk much about your other kids? Did you guys have a lot of
yeah.
conversations with them about what was happening, about the rate, right, that no one has survived this, that there is a timeline
Mhm.
of death? Did you guys have to do a lot of conversations that you probably weren't thinking you had to do with your children, especially your older one, 16, who probably understands a little bit more? What was that like?
Yeah, I'm sure we did. I'm
Okay.
sure we did. And I did try to, I tried to take some time to spend with the kids individually as well. Through that process, at least take them to breakfast or something, spend a little bit of time with them.
Mhm.
Um, we didn't hide anything from them. They didn't ask a lot. Um, so, I don't know. We're pretty open as a family. So I suppose I told them stuff, but I don't remember it. It wasn't really, these formal major meetings or anything. We
Sure.
just kind of kept them updated, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they were great. They really were amazing, and you know, it's hard to see a sibling die. I know, but I'm sure it was hard for them to watch her be treated so especially.
Yeah.
There was one day when her tumor came back, and we had a pretty big following on the blog at that point. People were really interested in Alice's story. She was so stinking cute, and so they were interested in her story. And I put at the end of one of them, if you want to send Alice a little present or something, just message me. I'll send you our address, because Amazon makes it easy to do that, right? And so 2 days later, whatever Prime takes, our kitchen table is just full of all these boxes. There's 30, 40 of them there.
Wow.
And they're all for her, and which is cool. But, I thought about my other kids watching their little sister get this kind of treatment. But they handled it so well. I was just so
Yeah.
proud of them. I mean, they were great. And yeah,
Yeah.
we didn't have a lot of profound heart-to-heart conversations, and
Mhm.
I don't know why. I don't know if that was failure on my part, or if they just didn't feel like they needed it, or I didn't. I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
It's an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, as I was reading, I was like, I wonder what's going on with the kids, especially the older one. I could see
Hmm.
Violet and the younger ones maybe not having so much
Sure.
understanding, but like the older one, the 16-year-old one. So she passed. It wasn't the outcome you were expecting, and you call the undertaker. You start that process. Just walk us, if you remember, walk us through the aftermath. Like, how are you as a father now that you're done with this season? She's gone. Alice is gone,
Mhm.
and she's in a better place, and now you're here. And so, do you remember much of that time, and what did you get back into the pulpit pretty soon after? There were people still visiting you guys. You and Michelle, your wife.
Mhm.
What was that like? What were those things like?
Um, you know, from a guy's perspective, a lot of that is it's like a job. You got to plan a funeral, and so you got to put a service together. You got to get the speakers you want, or try to put all that together. You got to pick out a grave site. You got to do all this sort of stuff, make all these decisions. And so you just kind of go into that mode. It's a work mode. um,
Yeah.
so yeah, went through that. And like I said before, just kind of run out of emotion. I did find the funeral. So our sanctuary is designed to hold like 300 max. I think we had 650 people come to the
Yeah.
funeral,
Yeah.
which was great. I'm so thankful for that. Um, So,
Yeah.
but Michelle and I both think of that as a really good day, because we just received the love and support of so many people, and so many people made a great effort to be there and minister to us. And I don't know, there's something just really fun about, fun is not probably the right word, but it was good to see her honored in that way,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
that meant a lot to us. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in some ways, those were good days. Of course, it's a world that didn't have Alice in it, and so
Right.
it was dimmer. It wasn't the same. Family dinner has never felt the same. You know this. You got
Sure.
four kids. You got four kids, but if one's missing, it feels like there's
Yeah.
something really wrong, right?
Right.
And so since Alice died, it's never felt right. And it's been 6 years, and we've got now three children-in-law, two sons-in-law, and a daughter-in-law, and it still doesn't feel like the table is quite full. And that's really
Sure.
annoying, you know.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
but Lord knows, and I guess I'm glad it's that way, because I wouldn't want it the other way, right? I wouldn't want to
Right.
say, "Oh, I don't miss her," so I'd
Right.
rather miss
Right.
her, even though it's painful.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned that the last 3 days were the hardest with God.
Yeah.
You're really frustrated. Um, you know, talk about a little bit about that. Like how did you deal with that? Because obviously now you're still a pastor. You're still strong in your faith. You're still walking with the Lord, even though the outcome wasn't what you expected, what you wanted.
Sure.
You did not create a God in your own image. He's not powerful. He didn't know this was going to happen. You didn't
Right.
begin to strip him of the things that make him God, right? You didn't
Right.
walk away. So was that like a slow kind of, okay, God, I'm beginning to trust you again? Or was the trust always there and you were just kind of getting back to that relationship, or your theology? Can you talk a little bit about that part?
Yeah, sure. So, in some ways, you're like Jacob wrestling with God, and you walk away with a limp, right? Um,
Sure.
and you wrestle all night. So, one of the things that ends up happening is you're thinking harder about God than you ever have in your life. I'm thinking harder about the things of God than I ever have in my life.
Sure.
Um, I'm thinking about God's sovereignty. I did put two chapters in the book, one on prayer. Like,
Hmm.
what do you make of all this prayer? We prayed and God didn't answer, even
Yes.
though God promises you ask for stuff and He'll give it to you. So how do you make sense of that? And I wanted to address that pastorally. But then the other thing was, what happens to kids when they die? I'm Reformed. The Westminster Confession talks about elect infants who die. The Synod of Dort talks about, you know, babies of believers, that are
Sure.
going to go to heaven. And so there's a strong tradition in the Reformed tradition that not all kids go to heaven.
Sure.
The elect ones do, maybe the covenantal ones do. And so I'm wrestling with that, here my
Sure.
daughter's 4. That's interesting parental thing to wrestle through too. It's like, all right, so how do you give your 4-year-old the gospel, and do you try to get her to pray a prayer? How do you try to make sure your kid is saved, right?
By Jesus
And
to your heart.
yeah, right. And on the one hand, you say, well, that's kind of silly. On the other hand, as a parent, you want to do just about anything you possibly can to make sure that your kid doesn't go to hell, right? Um,
Sure. Yeah.
and your days are limited, your days are numbered, and so here's Alice, who's 4, and kind of a. If I say she was simple, that sounds like I'm being mean, like she was, mentally
Right.
challenged. She wasn't. She was super trusting, and she wasn't complicated. And
Yeah.
she never asked why she was sick. She didn't ask what was going on. She just didn't care. She just liked to play dolls. So
Right.
those are things that I was wrestling with. And so all this wrestling with God, in some ways I was probably never closer to God, and because I was wrestling with the things of God all the time, I really wanted to be in the pulpit as much as I could, which wasn't a lot. It just wasn't my place at the church at the time. But man, when you wrestle with God and you learn things about God, your heart gets full and you got to talk about him, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
so so
Yeah.
yeah, that was also helpful, when it came to writing. It's like, okay, well, I can write these
Yeah.
things that I'm wrestling with. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And your prayer life, I mean, must have been the best probably because there was a lot of prayer in your book, constantly praying. And not just you, but
yeah.
hundreds of people praying for Alice. And so, I'm assuming your prayer life at that point and hopefully even still now was just on a whole nother level, you know,
Yeah,
somewhat.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I there's I would love to say, yeah, I wore holes in my jeans, in the knees because I was on my knees
Right.
all
On
the
your knees all
time.
the
And
time. Right. Right. Right.
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I look back at that and think, should I've done more? Like John MacArthur talked about one of his kids got in a car accident or had some sort of major medical thing where he was almost going to die. And he fasted for 3 days and pled for his life. And I think, oh, I didn't do that, Um,
Well,
in part because, like I said from the very beginning, I just had this sense that this is how this is going to end. and
right.
um and
You
I
mentioned
really
that.
do think, yeah, yeah. So it was hard for me to pray that the Lord would heal her when I really believed that that wasn't his plan.
Yeah.
And I felt bad about that. And I think, well, but that's just how I felt. And um and and I don't know if that's the work of the Spirit or what that is, or just spiritual laziness or downer. I don't know,
Well, well,
but that's how
we
I
have
felt.
an example in David, right? David fasted and
Mhm.
prayed, and yet his son died, right?
Yeah.
So we
Hmm.
have that example. But also, I wonder, were you kind of worried that maybe you might fall into that space where you're almost in denial, like, no, the Lord's going to heal her and it's going to be great, and
Yeah.
you know, were you scared you were going to enter into that, kind of thing where you're now, it goes from being like hopeful to just being like in denial and nope, she's going to be better, we're going to be a family again, we're going to, was that a thing, or not really?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
if it was or not. I never really had a hope that she was going to
Mm,
be healed.
yeah.
And I guess that was just because I looked at the realities of what this tumor was. It's not that I don't believe that God can do miracles,
Sure. Cool.
um,
Yeah, right.
but I didn't. I don't know. I didn't feel the urgency to spend a lot of time begging for one. I was
Mm,
just kind of like, all right, well, this is what the Lord has given us to deal with, and we're just gonna trust Him through it. And if He heals her, great, but
right.
that's not really the outcome that I was expecting. Um,
Sure.
I hoped for it, obviously, but I did try to be as clear eyed about the whole thing as I possibly could, and say, I don't know, kids who have this die. It's not that God can't do something, but
Right.
I mean, I even reasoned things like, well, if God didn't want her to die, He wouldn't have given her this. So, I mean, did God allow her to have this tumor so that He could heal it? Maybe, but it seems more likely the other way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I,
still asked. It's still
I'm
like, please,
reminded.
Lord, that would be nice.
I'm reminded of the story in the gospel where they asked Jesus, who sinned that this person is
Yeah.
sick, and
Right.
Jesus, my goodness, Jesus is amazing. His words
Mhm.
are shocking. He says, "No, no,
Yeah.
no. He's like this because God wanted to glorify Himself in His
Yeah.
healing." You're like, wait, what? What? He's like this because of this, and so I
Mhm.
understand, and I haven't been in your position, but like I just can't imagine the things that the reasoning in your head, the thoughts, the prayers, the conversations. I think there's a lot of things obviously that are not in this book. That you went through, and brother, like I told you when we had the conversation, I'm super encouraged by you, by your by your story, this season of your life, how you overcame, through the Holy Spirit, by God, you overcame. You're still faithful to the church, you're still faithful to God, you're still preaching God's word, your theology is still strong, which I'm thankful for. And there's that song that I love so much. He says, yeah, the Lord will keep me. The Lord will keep us or keep
Mhm.
me. because of his great love. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's what he did to you during this hard time. He kept
Mhm.
you, he kept your family, even though the outcome that you that you wanted, that the hundreds of people want, didn't come to pass. The Lord kept you, and he's given you in-laws and grandchildren, and a church. And I'm just super encouraged by your story. I'm so glad that I got to meet you in God's providence. You kept commenting
Likewise.
under my post. You kept
I'm
commenting, and
trolling you.
trolling me and trying to fight me. And no, I'm just kidding. Trying to fight me and everything.
I just had to straighten you out a little bit there. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a big one. Yeah, which we're probably gonna have to do a video on that, talk about that. But no, that was. I'm so glad you came into my life, and able to share your story. And my prayer is that this. I know it's been 6 years, and I know that at that time it was big. Hundreds of people were praying for you guys. You got 30, 40 boxes, so it was very well known. But I'm hoping that more people will watch this and hear your story, and they'll want to have you on their channel, and you'll continue to share the story, because a lot of us go through hard sufferings, and we have these
Yeah.
questions, and we struggle. Where are you, God? Why are you not doing what we would expect you to do, right? This is
Mhm.
something that I think that it touched me so much, because it's something I struggle with, because I think it's the
Mhm.
psalmist that says, Lord, teach us to number our days. We don't know our days. We don't know.
No, we don't.
We don't know tomorrow. We don't know if one of our loved ones will walk out the door last time we see them. And that is very, like, it's a sober thing. It's a sober
Yeah.
thing to thank the Lord for every day, every breath, that our children are healthy, that our wife are healthy, um, you know, or whatever the case may be. But to thank the Lord for every breath, every day, and to really try to be in people's lives, because we don't know when will be that last time. and
Mhm.
and that to me is sobering. And really, you have to put your trust in God, that every time your child's going to go out there and drive, that your mom and dad are going to go out there and drive, that the Lord is going
Mhm.
to it's going to keep them. And if something were to happen, to know that it wasn't a surprise. It
Yeah.
wasn't something that God didn't know about, that God had no power to stop or to do, right? But there's something that we cannot see, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't know all things. We don't know his plan. And to begin to question and reason can get into very dangerous territory. And so I'm
Yeah.
glad he kept you, and I'm glad you're still faithful pastor at your local church. And I hope your story reaches so much more. So we have a question. Somebody wants to know what the name of the book is. You have it there, right? Can you hold it up to
Oh
show the
yeah.
audience?
This is you probably have the
I have a different, right? Yeah,
Alice in the Palace. Yeah, this is an early cover, but that is a picture of little Alice, and
yeah.
so that's the
Alice
only
in the
one that I have.
Palace.
Alice in the Palace. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
there on
you can get
Amazon.
it on Amazon. That's where I got it, on
Yeah,
Amazon. Are
yeah.
you on any other like website, like Goodreads or anywhere else you can buy it, or just Amazon?
I think it's probably on Goodreads. I don't know if you can buy through Goodreads, but it's an Amazon book, so I
Mm.
put it together. I did the publishing on it,
Right,
so
self
yeah,
published. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So Amazon does that for me.
Yeah, get the book,
So,
guys. It's amazing. It reads so well. It's like a devotional. You're hearing somebody's heart, their inner thoughts, their struggles with the Lord. If you can purchase the book, it also helps Pastor Joe and his family when you do, and
yeah.
it helps him as well and his family. So, and if you guys, liked what you heard, and were touched by the story, please share this video, so that more people will hear Pastor Joe's story of Alice and his family, the struggles. And though the outcome with Alice isn't what we expected, God still delivered, and God still kept,
Mhm.
and God is still faithful and good, even through our suffering. I think Pastor Joe is a much better pastor, and much better. He can, one of the things I tell people is, um, you don't have to be an addict to relate to an addict, obviously, but suffering, right? When we suffer, when we go through suffering, and we have those moments of, where are you, God? What's going on,
Yeah,
right? We can sympathize and help those who are going through those same things, because we all do,
yeah,
and we all need each other
yeah,
in our stories to help one another, right? And to encourage
yeah,
each other in the Lord, and to say, look, I don't know why this happened. This goes beyond all human reasoning. I don't know. But what I do know is that God is faithful, and he's good,
yeah,
and all
yeah.
things work
Amen.
for our good. And if
Yes.
it didn't, If the outcome didn't happen now, if she didn't get healed now, well, she's in a better place and she's healed. And we will once again be with her in the resurrection. And that's the hope, right? And
Yeah,
so,
that's right. Yeah, resurrection is coming, and I don't think I really appreciated the wonder of what resurrection is until I laid my daughter in the ground.
hmm,
Um, it's not until you're putting that box in the ground, and you don't, the thing in that moment, the thing that I wanted more than anything in the world was for that lid to fly open and for her to say, "Hi, Daddy." And
sure.
I could visualize resurrection really for the first time in my life. I
Mm,
could almost taste it. And
mm,
and actually, the next Easter was probably the greatest Easter of my life, because I could really be like, yeah, resurrection, dead bodies coming up out of the ground. I'm all in on this. And
right,
because I'd use that phrase, Jesus was raised from the dead, for my entire life, so often that it didn't really strike me how wonderful that was. But when you
right,
stand in the cemetery and the one that you love is there, you just want to be raised from the dead. And so the wonder of resurrection, the wonder of a Christ who keeps his own, will raise them up. Um, you know, so I'm separated from Alice for now, but it's not going to last long, and the
right.
family will be back together in some way, in God's perfect plan. And I think I say this someday, we're going to tell God thank you for how you made this all work out, and we'll mean it. Like
Right.
I can say thanks God that you did all this, um, but I could wish it maybe went a different way. But someday I'm gonna be like, yeah, you did it right, and it's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so interesting the mystery of God's plan, right? Like,
Yeah,
um, people when Jesus was going, he said the same thing you just said. If this cup could pass, let it
yeah,
pass, but your will
yeah,
be done.
yeah,
And though people saw Jesus hung, they're like, this is tragedy. It was after the cross, the resurrection, that you
yeah,
saw the big picture, redemption.
yeah,
This was all pointing
yeah,
towards redemption. And the cross
yeah,
was part of that redemption, that plan of redemption.
yeah.
It was a difficult moment for Jesus, but there was a greater glory and hope after that.
Yeah,
And
Hebrews
mm,
12, for the joy set
said
before him,
before,
he endured the cross, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
so Jesus seems to think that if he goes through the cross, his joy is greater on the other side. And
right,
so, one of the things that I've come to realize is that God has called us through the suffering, and there's going to be greater joy on the other side because of it. I mean, the scripture is full of that notion that God uses suffering to honor and glorify and do great things for his people. That's 2 Corinthians 4:17. This momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory. It's like you don't get the eternal weight of glory without the light momentary affliction. You got to go through it. And
right,
so we went through this one. I know this as a pastor, everybody suffers, and some of us suffer in ways that are a little more, I don't know,
yeah,
noble. Well, like if your daughter is suffering through cancer, people feel bad for you. But if you're suffering because your spouse is an adulteress, or if you're suffering, um, you, you know, because of I don't know, there's other things that are just not noble, and
right,
people
right,
look at you kind of sideways, and so um, so many people kind of live with this invisible suffering that they just don't feel like they can talk about. We went through a kind of suffering where people actually came around us and were like, hey, we want to help you through this. Not everybody gets to suffer in that way.
right,
So we were
yeah,
blessed, to suffer in a way that we could suffer publicly, and it inspired sympathy, but not all suffering is that way.
is
So
that way. You're right.
yeah,
Yeah, it was out to the
yeah,
public or to local
hmm,
public and so on. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
Pastor Joe, where can people find you if they wanted to find you? Obviously, Amazon for your book, but are you on
yep,
Twitter,
yep.
YouTube, or anything like that? Is your church on YouTube?
Yeah, the church is on YouTube. It's Lewis Lake Covenant Church,
Louis Lake
and
Covenant Church.
yep, yep. And
They
I
can hear
guess I'm
some of
on.
your sermons, your amazing fire sermons.
Yeah, they can hear some of my sermons anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if YouTube. I don't know if our archive goes back. I do appreciate some of the sermons the Lord did allow me to preach back in those days, and I go back and listen to those. because you can't really replicate a sermon that you
You
preached
should
in the middle
upload
of
them
that.
if they're not there.
So
You should upload them so we can
yeah,
hear them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So otherwise, I am on Twitter, um, but what was it? Make of Wood, I think.
Yeah,
Which
you can
which
type
we
in
can
Joe
use.
Reed or Make of Wood. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, thanks for having me on,
Well,
Ricardo. I really appreciate it.
no, I appreciate you, Pastor Joe, for um, sharing your story. Again, when I first asked you, I was like, "There's no way he's gonna get on here and share the story," and you said yes,
Now
and
you wish I hadn't.
I was like, "No, no, no, I wanted you to do this," and so I'm glad you did. And so thank you, and thank you for everyone who was watching, in and out or whatever, who watched it all, or if you're watching this after, the live is over. I hope that you're blessed by Pastor Joe's story, and his daughter Alice. Go out and purchase the book, whether it's a physical copy or electronic copy. I have two electronic copies, so go and purchase it, read it. It will bless you. It's one of those heart wrenching, tear kind of books, and it's going to bless you. So please share the video as well. And I'm excited I could get Pastor Joe on here. Until next time, guys, thank you so much, and God bless all of you.
Thanks.